Hello, today I'll be giving a presentation on Chapter 7, the axial skeleton. There are three sections that we'll be covering: the skull, the vertebral column, and the thoracic cage. In total, there are about 80 bones combined of the three sections. So the skull is primarily your head, the vertebral column is your spine, and the thoracic cage is like your rib area. The skull by itself has 22 bones. As mentioned in the previous slide, there are 22 bones in the skull. 21 of those bones are immobile and one is mobile. The singular bone that is mobile is the mandible, which is your lower jaw bone. The skull is divided into two sections: the cranium, also known as the brain case, and the facial bones. The bones that are listed here are the cranium, which is your parietal bones, temporal bones, frontal bone, optical bone, sphenoid bone, and ethmoid bone. And basically, this is your brain case, which is like the top half, and then the bottom half is your facial bone. Again, there are 8 cranial bones, which is your two parietal, 2 temporal, frontal, occipital, sphenoid, and ethmoid. Their function, the cranial bones functions would be to act as an outer layer for the brain, to protect attachments from the side of the head, and also to protect the neck muscles. Something that important to remember is that all the cranial bones are flat bones, and that the curved skull adds strength for the weight. Of the 14 facial bones, there are two bones that are unpaired, which are the mandible and the vomer. The rest of the bones are paired, which include the maxillae, zygomatics, nasals, lacrimals, palatines, and inferior concave. Um, this slide is a slide that shows where the bones are located, and if they are highlighted in red, then they are part of the cranial bones. So you have 2 temporal bones that are located on the temples above your ear. Um, there are 2 because it's located on both sides of skulls. Same with the parietal. They're the top and side of your head. Frontal bone, which is your forehead and sinus. Occipital bone, which is the back of the skull. Mandible, which is again your lower jaw. Maxillary, which is your upper jaw. And zygomatic, which is located in your cheekbones. Here we have the right lateral view of the skull, and there are some important terms that we should know, like the coronal suture, which is located over here, the parietal bone, which again we mentioned earlier, zygomatic arch, the Baturion, again your mandible, which is the mobile bone of the skull. Again, we have the same picture from the previous slide, and here we have some paired bones shown in the picture on the left and right. There are also boundaries that we should know. For example, the anteriorly by frontal bone, inferiorly by temporal bone, and posteriorly by occipital bone. Here we have the temporal bone, which is located on the highlighted area of the skull in this picture. And here are some other terms we should know. This is the external acoustic meatus. This is the squamous portion. This is the zygomatic process. This is the articular tubercle. This is the mandibular fossa. This is the styloid process. This is the mastoid process. And then this is the mastoid portion. So again, we have the same picture that was in the last slide. This is just the temporal bones and the other terms that we should know or get to know. So there are three different regions that the temporal bones are divided into. Sorry, four different regions that the temporal bones are divided into. First is the squamous portion. Second, we have the zygomatic process. Third, we have the mastoid. And lastly, we have the petrous ridge. The mastoid function would be for muscle attachment, and the petrous ridge is the floor of the cranial cavity. Last thing we need to know is the landmarks, which is part of the picture. Um, okay, so this is a anterior view of the skull, and here are some terms to go over with it. Again, we have the coronal suture. We have the frontal bone, the parietal bone, supraorbital foramen, supraorbital margin, and the glabella. In this slide, we will go more in depth of the frontal bone. Essentially, the frontal bone is makes up the forehead. It also forms the supraorbital margins, which is the thickening of superior margins of orbits. Another important term to mention is the glabella, which is the smooth portion of the frontal bone between orbits. And this is the same picture from the last slide. This will conclude my presentation. I hope that you have learned something from my presentation. I didn't quite go over the other two sections, which is the thoracic cage and the vertebral column. But if you'd like to learn more about those, then the rest of the chapter 7 slides will tell you everything you need to know. Thank you for listening.